Hey everyone, this is Jeff Reinholtz. Welcome back to another episode of MSP Insights. Today, I'm unbelievably lucky to be joined by Dustin Puryear. Dustin, CEO of Puryear IT. Thanks for joining me, Dustin.
Hey, I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, thanks for carving out some time with me today. Jump on today's episode. We've got a bunch we could talk about around your business, your growth, your innovation in tech. The good news is over the next 30 minutes, I want to unpack all of it. I think probably though the best place, Dustin, for you and I to get going today is I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you got started in the MSP space. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, it was kind of a meandering path. So I was working as a developer and sysadmin in the Unix world during the .com kind of boom, the tail end of that. I graduated college or actually I was in the middle of finishing college and I'd worked for my first .com. It was a streaming service. They went bankrupt. And you know, as I had other jobs, I'd built like a list of other consultants that would pull me into projects. And so I was doing a lot of moonlighting. And then when that company went bust, you know, I didn't have too many obligations. So I said, let's see what happens if I just have my own company. And I literally got a phone and I put it on the wall. And by the way, that's not sufficient marketing. I learned that very quickly. But that's how I started. And I didn't actually start as an MSP. I did very specialized identity access management for universities and state agencies, just because of what I was doing for the .coms. And then slowly I transitioned into recurring revenue. And then repeatability became a problem with, can I repeat myself? So I transitioned slowly into an MSP. And, you know, 20 years later, here we are.
So I love how simple you just put that out there, right? Like all of a sudden I'm in this business, it's not doing well. I go and throw a phone on the wall. Next thing you know, I'm here, right? 20 years later and you're growing and you're scaling. Let's take a look at something though you hit on there, which I love that you just went to, is you started to think a little bit about, okay, here's where I got my start in the tech space, but I wanted to transition and really become an MSP. What did you figure out as you were going through that transition of, okay, here are some things that I've done in the past in the world of consulting. Sounds like you were focused into higher ed, but saying, nah, now I'm going to be an MSP. How'd that occur?
So when we were focused strictly on Unix directory services, authentication, like that's all we were doing for hospitals as well. You know, I was just struggling to find other Dustins, honestly. It's a very small circle that really specializes in identity access management. You can make a ton of money, but I just slowly became kind of I guess I would say I just shifted my mind where I enjoyed the business more than technical aspects of the work. And it was difficult in that space. You need a lot of money to hire people that are going to get paid a lot. And so I said, there's got to be a better way. And so you go from high-end consulting where it really is just difficult to find people. And so I just started shifting into the mindset of what can I do where I can find people like me, but not quite as specialized. And so that's really where that was the birth of that idea. And it wasn't very fast. I still remember to this day the amount of opportunities I gave to other IT companies. Because we simply, at the time, we didn't even do Windows. You asked me, do you manage a Windows network? We were like, no, here, go call this other person. And so it's just kind of mind-boggling when I look back at just the transition between the states of the company where I'm at.
Interesting. It's interesting to see how you began to figure out what you were and more importantly, where you wanted to go in the business.
Yeah, a lot of it had to do with, you know, I'm a software developer by trade. And a lot of it really just came down to, I started enjoying the business more than the technical side of it. And so when that happens, you have to make some decisions.
So let me ask you, because that's probably one of the biggest things I see in this industry. The amount of men and women that I meet in this journey of becoming or meeting an established CEO who, you know, pardon the reference, but you go from turning the wrenches to running Ford Motor Company, right?
Right.
How was that for you? Did you miss the work of being able to get in there and do the work? Or did you like becoming a CEO and figuring out how do I solve these net new problems of growing a business and team?
I like the whiteboard.
Okay.
Right? That's the world I like to live in. And so if you give me an opportunity to problem solve, including a technical problem,
Yep.
I will. But
Okay.
if you give me an opportunity to work through a marketing or a sales or kind of a business process flow chart, I enjoy that even more.
Okay.
And the converse is true as well. I do see sometimes people shift from being technical to business. That would include being a tech, shifting into being a manager.
Yep.
And sometimes they feel as though that's the natural path, but it's not always. Just like I would not have been happy being a tech my whole life. There are many people that force themselves into the transition, but it doesn't make sense for them because they're not really happy doing that type of work. And so I think just as you get older, there's just a level of self-awareness where you realize 80-20 rule, I should enjoy what I'm doing 80% of the time, maybe dislike it 20%.
Yep.
When it flips where it's 80% dislike, you got a problem. Whether that means you transition when you should have, or whether it's time to move.
Got you. I think that's great advice because I think a lot of folks create these unfair career goals where they say, oh, I want to be a manager.
Yes.
And then let me guess, it follows up with, well, why do you want to be a manager? Oh, I want to make more money. Time out.
Yeah, there's no connection between those two.
There's no correlation between the two, right? If you love what you do, be great at being an individual contributor in an area that you're passionate about. And
Absolutely.
I think to your point though, too, like let's unpack this a little bit. Like, I'd love to see your perspective because I hit on this all the time. I love looking at the IQ versus the EQ. And I think when you do that pivot into leadership, and especially in like a CEO role where you're at right now, you've got to have a high EQ. I'd love to get your perspective.
Totally. Right. No, I totally agree. I think, I think you can be a successful leader without a high EQ. I think we see a lot of examples of that out in the market, particularly in software. But it's a different model, and you're going to have a different type of impact with your team. And they're going to have different motivations. Now, obviously, in this market or any market, you always need to pay your people properly, right? I make sure my staff is well compensated, but there's going to be a different team if they don't enjoy working with you, right? There's a difference between somebody that is happy with their compensation and loves the job, or somebody that will suffer the job because of the compensation, right? And so I think people that have a high EQ as leaders, they tend to have a team that enjoys, that appreciates the compensation, but loves the job. And so it really depends on what type of model you're trying to build, where your IQ versus your EQ ratio needs to be.
Interesting. I like your perspective on that as well. I like that direction. So let me ask you then, because you also hit on this at the beginning of the conversation, 20 years, you're consistently evolving your business, you're maturing it, taking a look back where you were, where you got started, thinking a little bit about these two worlds, but what do you think are some of the biggest challenges you see in the space as being an MSP today versus what you saw 20 years ago? Because I would envision 20 years ago, you saw a whole landscape of opportunity going, oh my gosh, look at all these things we could do. You hit the proverbial nail on the head where all of a sudden you're going, we were handing business off. Like we weren't even fulfilling these requests. We didn't do that. But, do you still see as much opportunity coming to you today within the business versus what you saw 20 years ago? Or what's the landscape look like?
Yes, I think there's as much opportunity. I think it's a different set of opportunity.
Okay.
I've mentioned this to people over the years, and you kind of see it coming true, which is the channel partners will start to compete with the channel.
Yep.
Microsoft is a good example. We're pretty much a pure 365 shop. I'm not going to change that, but clearly they've been broadcasting for years that they're going to compete with the MSP market. They've been not directly saying it, but indirectly they've been warning us for years, and that's going to continue. I think the problem in the MSP space is the same problem as it was 10, 15 years ago, which is value. So, you hear this word value all the time. The problem that people have in the MSP space is they still think their value is how good their engineers are at managing infrastructure. And if that's the value you're bringing, Amazon's going to eat your lunch.
Yep.
Right? You cannot compete with that. Yep. And the second value people think they bring is the relationship with their customers. And, I think that's not going to go well with a lot of people. But the reality is, yes, you're going to retain your customers, but you will lose the battle because of attrition. And so, sure, you can keep your current customers, but over time, they're going to go away. You cannot win new customers with customer relationships because you don't have a relationship with those people. And so it comes down to value. For us, years ago, I kind of saw this developing. And so we transitioned from IT to IT plus training plus business automation. And so our big differentiator when we approach a prospect is, look, IT is great, but it doesn't do much if you don't know how to use the application, right? And so where a lot of help desk will say, look, we don't train your staff. We brought in Microsoft certified trainers and we pair all that. And so the benefit to us, I think, long-term is we can say our value is, we don't care where your equipment is. It can be cloud, it can be anywhere. You still don't know how to use the software. You still need us to help train you and ensure you're productive. Now, that's not going to be for everybody, but it comes down to the value proposition. So I think it's the same thing that the market has shifted in terms of what the tech is, but it just comes down to what's the value you're going to provide to your customer. That's the core issue.
As the guy who gets the lead technical training, we say it all the time, a trained partner is a retained partner. So you are preaching from our proverbial hymnal over here when we think about how important it is that if you can educate and build confidence in your clients, they're going to come back to you. Because I think the big piece in all of that, Dustin, and again, people love to throw buzzwords there. To me, that establishes trust.
Yeah, you always want to, and this has been a battle cry for years in MSP spaces, be not just a subject matter expert, but a thought leader and a trusted advisor.
Spot on.
And again, if you're competing, two MSPs are competing. In fact, I will tell you right now, when we go to our prospect and we sit down in sales, I always tell them, because we're in a friendly competitive market, and there's a couple of people, yes, we want to go for the throat, but most of them, I know these people, I've seen them at the bar, we'll have a drink. And I'll straight up tell the prospect, in all honesty, Mr. Prospect, their help desk is probably just as good as our help desk. Honestly, if I have an outstanding engineer, they may try to hire them. And if they have somebody good, I'm probably going to hire them. Like, it's not about the help desk. That is a cost of doing business. I need to provide a solid help desk experience. It's what you stack on top of that. That's a differentiator. And the weakest selling proposition for an MSP is how good their help desk is. Because that's just bread and butter MSP service. You have to provide that.
That's a given, right? It's funny. I think there's like there's a skit out there that talks about making sure, like, this comedian has it. He talks about the importance of as dads taking care of their kids, and he's like, it's expected. Same thing applies with help desk.
Yeah.
Right? You're expected to fulfill that request. There's nothing cheeky or cool. You're simply doing what you're paid to do, right?
Yeah, you're not outperforming because you show up to the baseball game. Right. Like,
I'm here.
Yeah, the police are going to call you because you didn't pick up your kid, right, from the baseball game. Like, just show up. That's just the cost of it. Of doing business. I agree.
You're absolutely spot on. So let's go the direction because you're talking about help desk. We're talking about service delivery. One of the biggest pieces, Dustin, when I first started to reach out to you and you and I started to get into conversation around how we can collaborate, is I was impressed on how you have taken your business and solved problems through technology. Two conversations I want to look at right now. Number one, I want to talk a little bit about how data product and or products have helped you scale and grow your business and solve problems, right? Where again, scalability is always tied to the tech. And then I want to talk a little bit about how you have uncovered a need in the space and some things you're doing as you grow new technology to support problems you're trying to solve. But let's unpack number one. Let's take a look. Data product. What was the first thing that you said, listen, this thing makes sense. It's going to solve this problem for me. Fill in the blank. What was it?
So we onboarded Autotask, and we've been around long enough that we had used open source help desk software. We had used all kind of commercial products, and they were always just a little too clunky or difficult for us to really get our heads around.
Okay.
And man, this was around 2012 or 13. So we've been with Data for a long time, but we did a demo with Autotask, and it was still a relatively new product, but I said, there's something here. It has all the modules that we need. Because a lot of the software we had, I had a project management and ticketing, and I had a billing system and time. It was all it was just a mess. And so just having one place, one universe that I could live in, that was a huge deal for me. And understanding that you get really solid choices in each of those modules was a win. And not a knock or anything with Autotask or Datto, but there might be a module in Autotask that's not the best of breed, right? Like, does the project module behave like a base camp? No. But you know what? It plugs into my billing, and it plugs into my help desk, and it plugs into my CRM. And now instead of having multiple pieces of software, I have a lot of really good software that works together. And that kind of synergy, I don't know if that word is still used anymore.
Yep.
But that kind of connectiveness is huge when you're running a company. When you have a million pieces of software running, it's just too much. It's too much to figure it all out.
It's funny you say that. In my previous life, working on the executive team of a friend's MSP, we used to call it one throat to choke. Let's simplify it, right? Nobody wants to track down 10 different vendors and then finding out of the 10, only 4 can integrate and work together. Then next thing you know, you've got finance running a creative workaround, and then sales really can't do the billing that they need. So, well, we got to hire somebody to do billing. Well, what happens to the billing? Well, the one person writes the quote for sales. Well, what happens when that quote needs to change? Well, we need to put another request. Next thing you're going, all right, so I got a $60,000 resource writing proposals on something that I know is probably going to change, but a pivot here, and then finances do it. Like, I know it. I'm right there with you. So then let me ask you this. So you unify, you get there. How long though would you say it took you and your team to get everything working with a sense of synergy and clarity? Would you still say you're on that journey? And the reason I ask you this is I was meeting with a partner the other day, and he had commented, he goes, Jeff, I've had Autotask for 12 years. And he goes, I just found a report the other day that let me know I was underutilizing my team.
Right.
So, how long did it take you guys to get up to speed and feel comfortable?
Yeah, so we've been up to speed. I guess it only took us a couple of years to really get it like humming. And it only takes, it depending on how much you want to tackle. If you want to just come in with the billing and the help desk, then you can get up within a few months.
Okay.
And that's really our main driver there was help desk. And we were using a different package for the billing of the time tracking, and just having one place to go was big. Yeah. And if you focus on just what's the most important part of it, you can move pretty quick. And if you want to use all of Autotask, it can take a while. It's a significant piece of software, right? You're not going to just deploy Salesforce or NetSuite and it just works. Like, yes, there's a lot of out-of-the-box configuration done for you, but it's a sophisticated piece of software. And so over time, you can really adapt it to your business rules, but it takes time. Honestly, a lot of companies, me included, I didn't realize we had business rules at first, right? I didn't understand, hey, what's the workflow of an invoice? What happens if they dispute it? What do we bill for? What do we not bill for? And a lot of that just morphs over time. And then a piece of software like Autotask sometimes forces you into that decision-making because you didn't realize before, hey, I do need a role for this.
It's huge. It's huge. And it's interesting you hit on that because we had just launched our latest Datto certification around Autotask PSA as a Datto certified deployment specialist. But when we started to kick off, Dustin, the core course architecture, we had roughly 45 different topics and lessons we could have educated on because it's so robust. And it got to a point where we looked around with the subject matter experts in the room, and we could honestly say, if you were to think about this in today's world of a singular product, there's probably 4 products within the product, right? But to your point, unification, right? That one throat to choke, everything's connected, everything's working together. I think, again, it simplifies everyone's bigger picture, especially think about the seat that you sit in as a CEO.
Yeah, I just want to be able to build reports out of one place. And the other part of it is, look, Autotask doesn't do everything, and it doesn't have a solution for every business role. It can't.
Yep.
And that's why APIs exist. And so, I was really able to rely a lot on my background to build automation that didn't exist in Autotask, where I could see it didn't make sense to a lot of customers of Autotask, but for us it did.
Yep.
And so the API helps fill in the gaps where data may have a different thought process. Hey, this feature should work like X. And I think, no, it should work like Y. And so I use the API to make it work like Y, whereas the default is for the X mark.
Love it. And I love, again, it's the customization to fit exactly what you need within the business.
Right.
So let's dig in a little bit further. Identify problem, solve for problem, continue to evolve and innovate within Autotask. Let's dig in as you thought, okay, let's continue to solve bigger problems. Let's talk a little bit about your innovation. Share a little bit about what you're building today in the world of software.
Yeah, you talk about Giant Rocket Ship?
Absolutely.
Okay, so yes, I have a software as a service company, Giant Rocket Ship, and what's happened is over several years, we've just built this layered model of automation. And a lot of this automation it's not available, not even just in Autotask. You don't find it in your competitors. Maybe this automation is in some of the very large systems out there. I haven't seen it, but I just see a lot of custom work being done around things as mind-numbingly labor-intensive as for us. It was, how do you dispatch effectively? How do you schedule work effectively? How do you set appointments effectively? How do you escalate team tickets between teams? And honestly, 99.9% of your MSP say, well, of course, that's your dispatcher and that's your service manager. But why am I paying the smart person to like move Legos around on calendars and figure out this ticket's a higher priority than that ticket? Like literally, that's what a computer is for. A dispatcher should be moved to the title service coordinator.
Yep.
And that person moves obstacles out of the way. And a service manager needs to be maximizing the team, not working through escalation processes. And so we wrote software for Autotask that does that. We used it for so long and ended up shifting that into its own company. And so that's what we do, is we provide a fully automated system for dispatch, scheduling, appointment setting, and escalations.
Interesting. I love, again, how you took a look at how people are being utilized in resource allocation. And I love it was, we're not in the business of getting rid of the people. We're in the business of having them solve bigger and better problems in what they're actually skilled to do versus, again, let me move Lego from here to here to here to here, right? Mind-numbingly simple, to be honest with you. So it's great to see what you've done to actually build technology to leverage that level of automation, right? Plus, I think the thing that nobody really gives enough credit to when you do something like that, risk mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of opportunity for inherent risk, when you and I are left at our own druthers to have to move something, it's just a matter of time before we will screw that up. It is guaranteed. Right. It is guaranteed that it'll happen. So it's great to see what you've done to solve a problem through technology. So you've built this, you've implemented it. How have you seen this positively impact between Autotask and your technology? How is that positively moving your MSP forward today?
Well, it's helped us not have to hire more people than we really need at our current level.
Okay.
And so things that we see other MSPs hiring more and more. So an example is there's typically a ratio people have between dispatchers and techs. Yep. Right. Let's say you have 7 or 8 techs. At that point, you either need a service manager or a dispatcher. And so for us, as we've grown, we just don't have to hire that other person. And the reason is, again, shifting people to where they do the best work. Human beings are good at working with human beings. Computers are good at working with computers, right? And so if we write software that talks to Autotask and moves the data around, and your service coordinator calls the end user and says, hey, look, we've tried to reach you 4 times. I got to close this ticket out. What can we do to move this forward? Honestly, isn't that a better use of your service coordinator than fumbling around with data? Smart. And so it is about how do you maximize those people? And for us, it really is just making sure that everybody is in the right role, whereas human beings are going to excel, and humans do not excel at repeating, recurring, mind-numbing work. They just don't.
Yeah, you're spot on. So I've got to ask you then, based on what you're sharing, as you're continuing to drive innovation, thinking, creativity, there's a lot of different buckets here, but I'd love to get your point on where you see the MSP today. Where do you see it in 3 years?
Mine or just MSPs in general?
I think MSPs in general.
I think it's a rocky road. I think obviously there's a lot of consolidation in the market, and not just on the channel partner and the software partner side, but the MSPs.
Okay.
There is definitely a current shift. Now this happens every 10 years. It's going to happen 10 years again, but there's definitely a market shift. And I think if MSPs don't start to pivot right now and focus on what's their new value they're providing,
Yep.
It doesn't be training. It can be process automation. It can be tying in your systems with a specialized industry. Whatever it is, again, if you just focus on infrastructure, you're in trouble. And I would say over the next 3 years, you're going to see a lot of consolidation. You're going to see a lot of MSPs that are not transitioning start to really contract. Okay. And I think that the MSP in 3 years is going to have a solution stack to bring into their customers. They're not going to say, I provide a help desk. They're going to say the help desk infrastructure management is the foundation of what we provide.
Yep.
And then on top of that, I provide this service because it's tightly integrated with the user experience. And so it makes sense for me to provide that to you. Therefore, that is my value to you. And I see that being where it is. I think this pure play MSP model, it does not have that much longer to live.
I agree with you. And I think the piece of it, there's a realization in the businesses that you're currently supporting. When I say you, I'm going to put every MSP CEO into the same role. Yep. That consumer is becoming so well educated and best understanding now that I think there's even a little bit of a shift. Once upon a time, people were like, oh, here are the guys that are in charge of tech, and this is what they charge me every single month. It's an associated front on two factors. Number one, I believe it's a cost of doing business. But I also believe today, if you don't have technology integrated into your business, and I don't care if you're selling muffins or pencils, you're missing out on opportunity, right? Because there's such a great opportunity to leverage tech, to sell, to educate, right? Anything, right? It's fascinating. The other day I was sitting down with this chiropractor. He's like, well, where would technology impact my business? I go, how do you schedule today? Well, somebody calls me and then there's a service that goes and takes the call. I'm like, use Calendar. Like, stop wasting your time, right? Like, why are you paying somebody to pick up a phone? He's like, oh, right. Good point, right? But to your point, let's go back to the beginning of the conversation. It leads with education. And where that conversation started with my friend as a chiropractor was a bit of an ego being like, how are you going to tell me technology is going to integrate my chiropractic practice?
Right.
Thanks for asking. Here's a small recommendation, right? Is that a problem you were trying to solve in your overall P&Ls at the end of every month? Let me know how it works. But again, driving that collaboration with businesses that want to go, hey, Dustin, here's a seat at the leadership table. Help us architect success in our small business. Here's where we are. How do we future-proof ourselves? And where does your team fit in, right? I think that's the no-brainer.
I think that comment helps me also kind of split between the MSP of 2 years ago, or even 3-4 years ago, and the MSP of 3 years from now, which is, you're right, technology is important for the end user and the businesses we serve. But the conversation, I think where a lot of people are getting stuck is they're having the do you want electricity conversation, right? And the conversation is, what kind of signage or digital signage do you want to market your business? Yep. And so a lot of MSPs are stuck in here's the best way to get electricity to your home, which is, here's your server quote. And by the way, let's meet to talk about your workstation upgrades. That's just talking about electricity going into the building. Like, I get it. It should just be of course you need electricity. Here's how you're going to get it. That's just a matter of fact conversation. Yep. But the MSPs of 3 years from now need to be saying, hey, what's that digital signage that's being driven by the electricity, right? And so MSPs should be saying, hey, look, here's how we're going to help you automate your scheduling by your front desk staff, right? And here's how it's supported by our stack. And of course, don't try to solve everything, but become an expert in a couple of key areas for the industries you serve. And then that's your value stack right there. And so we all just need to quit selling electricity. That's been solved. Yep. That's behind us. And honestly, customers don't want to hear about electricity anymore. It's a done deal. Move to, what can we do with this electricity? Yeah. And again, that's the MSP of 3 years from now.
Love the perspective, and I love the reflection in the direction you just went with that. So I've got one more before we call it a day. This is my big one. I love to put it out to all my guests. Thinking about your younger self, 20 years, your growth in tech, being an entrepreneur, being a leader. What is that advice you're giving to your younger self?
Everything is HR. Every growth, every contraction, every mistake, every boom is really just capturing and managing the HR in your company.
Okay.
I have two major mistakes I've been consistent on until recently, which is first, I don't just dedicate constant time to hiring the best people. You know, there's this saying of always be selling. We'll always be interviewing. That's so important. You should always have a hiring funnel.
Yep.
And be honest with them. Hey, I don't have an opening right now. But the second we start growing, I want you on my team. Let's interview. Let's see if we're a fit for one another. I'll circle back with you every 6 months. Be ready with that hiring funnel, because every time we've grown in the past, I would just say like the growth outpaces my ability to hire. Okay. And so I learned several years ago, fix that, right? You need to have a hiring funnel. And then the other part is constant. It's always the concept of HR, which is if you find somebody's not a part of your team, you need to transition them out, because one person can sink 20 people. And I would say all MSPs that have payroll have gone through understanding you need the right people. And if you make the mistake of hiring the wrong person, it is always the owner's mistake, by the way. If somebody doesn't fit on the team, 100% of the time, you miss something in the interview. You miss something in your due diligence. It's your fault, not the other person's fault. But you hired the wrong person. You need to transition in a healthy way. That person no longer being in the team. But just keep in mind, all of your growth comes around having the right people on the team. Everything else is laying out.
I love the advice and I love the recommendation, because I say it all the time. You want a healthy garden, you can't have any weeds.
Yes, absolutely.
And make sure too, when you find the weed, don't throw it in your neighbor's yard. Get it to the curb. Dustin Puryear, thanks so much for joining us on MSP Insights. This was a great episode. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you.